Last year we spent a good deal of time looking at the thoughts of the Stoics, the great philosophers of Roman and even of Greek times, who have a lot to say about how to live that seems to be relevant to us in the 21st century. And this year we're popping in occasionally to visit some of the great ideas from the Stoics that are especially relevant to us at this time. And today I want to talk about virtue, because virtue is something that seems often forgotten today. I mean, when I was a child I used to hear that expression, patience is a virtue, and it seemed as if everyone knew that you were supposed to be virtuous or have virtues. What are these virtues? Where do they come from? And how can we understand in today's world how to live a virtuous life? The idea of virtue, the aim of virtue, was how to live properly as a human being, or maybe we could say how to live happily as a human being. Certainly, one of the principal aims of philosophy through the ages has been to understand exactly that. How do we live happily, contentedly, or deal with the hard stuff? Whatever angle we may take, philosophy is an attempt to deal with the difficulty of, they called it the human condition, we still call it the human condition, the struggle to understand how to live a good life in a very difficult world, which doesn't explain it itself to us. And one of the most commonly known sources of virtue of the philosophers is in fact Aristotle. Aristotle said that the greatest virtue of all was contemplation, intellectual contemplation, using the intellect to understand who you are and the world that you live in. So that itself is part of what the aim at living a virtuous life is all about. Additionally, Aristotle identified 12 virtues that make up living correctly. The first of those, he said, was courage, which was about, of course, being brave and acting brave, kind of like doing what you have to do in the situation, acting courageously. The second virtue, according to Aristotle, was temperance, which is about self-control, about restraint, about responding appropriately and acting appropriately in a situation. The third of the virtues was liberality, being liberal, being open of heart, being charitable, being generous, opening yourself to others, liberalness, freedom, being free that way. And fourthly, he called it magnificence. We might call it joyousness, or the joy of life, being warm and positive towards other people. Aristotle also lists pride as a virtue, more commonly known in Western culture as one of the 7 deadly sins. But what he was referring to was satisfaction in your own endeavors. He didn't really just mean pride, meaning I'm magnificent. He meant satisfaction, being content with what you're achieving and what you're doing. It's enough for you, is what the pride is. Then, of course, there's honor, always comes up, and that's being admired, being respected, and being respectful and admiring of those who deserve it, who generate honor. Also, seventhly, being good-tempered, being level-headed, responding appropriately, and response to external things is something the Stoics would become very big on after Aristotle, and which is still very fundamental to even their philosophies of virtue, and to how to live as a human being. Responding the correct way is one of the most important factors in that. And similarly to good-temperedness is treating others well, so friendliness, sociability, being kind and sociable with others, but maintaining good relationships with those around you is what friendliness is all about. So acknowledging, as many of these do, that we live in a social world, which is something actually more associated with the modern ideas of virtue. A lot of these traditional ideas of virtue are about how to be a good human being, whereas the modern ideas of virtue are often related to how to treat other people. In other words, be helpful and so on. You can see a mix of those kind of things in the original ancient ideas, from managing yourself better to managing other people better. Truthfulness, Aristotle's 10th virtue, is one of the most important ones that crosses both of those. It's about being truthful and frank and straightforward to other people, as well as being an honest and true person. So an action that is also a state of being is another characteristic of Aristotle's virtues. Maybe we could define a virtue as that, a state of being that translates into an action which both handles ourselves and other people in a way that produces happiness or a better life. That's my definition of virtue and what those virtues are meant to be all about. Then there's wit. Sorry, that's the 10th one, is wit. And wit is also, of course, about having a sense of humor, about learning to laugh at yourself, about learning to laugh at others, and about appreciating the craziness of the world. Because the whole point, as I said, of philosophy was to try and get a handle on how do we deal with a crazy world. Aristotle says, well, one of the virtues is accepting that it's crazy and having a sense of humor about it. Instead of constantly, there's got to be a solution, this is painful, I must not feel pain. Sometimes the only way is to laugh. And another great virtue, one of the greatest to the ancient Greeks, is friendship. And that is getting support from others and giving support to others. Companionship, being with others. There's again that strong acknowledgement that we are social beings that perhaps has led to us sometimes replacing our own needs with the needs of others, because we tend to have a philosophy of virtue that says you will be virtuous if you do something good for someone else. You can really see in some of the thoughts of Aristotle that so influences us, it's got to be a mixture of our own and others, which we'll talk about in a second. The 12th and final virtue mentioned by Aristotle is justice. Being fair, being impartial, being even-handed, kind of doing the right thing, which is, of course, a virtue. To the Stoics, virtue isn't just a behavior, it's actually a learnt skill. Doesn't come easily, necessarily. So you have to understand it. To the Stoics and to Aristotle, you have to study how to live well and how to live correctly. It doesn't come automatically. We're instinctual creatures. Sometimes we're animal creatures. And a lot of that might help our survival skills, but is not about necessarily living harmoniously in the world or dealing with the difficulty of the world. So the Stoics said you have to learn how to live well. And one of the ways to learn how to live well is to study yourself, to study your person, to study human nature, and to develop expertise at it. And originally, there are three core virtues that the Stoics are really referring to that is a little bit different than how Aristotle sees things. The first of those is accepting and living with your true nature rationally. So it's not wanting to be someone else or something else that you are not. We would use words like self-acceptance, loving yourself, dealing with yourself in a more rational manner. This is who I am. This is my nature. Let me love myself and love that for that. Love myself for that without self-criticism, without inner tension and conflict. So living with your true self and accepting that is the first of the virtues to them. A very powerful one and sounds very modern to us as well. Secondly, the same towards other people. So living at one with others, living harmoniously with others. Even other people who are not people you like, you might have enemies, you might have people that you'd rather not see. if you understand yourself as part of the human community, then at the very least, it's trying to live harmoniously with them. So if you've got trouble with a neighbor, it's working out, how can I establish harmony? It doesn't say befriend that neighbor. But once you start accepting that neighbor as just like yourself, maybe you will. So then, of course, it extends to external things other than people. And the Stoics say living at one with external things would also help you accept whatever happens to you without complaints, without resistance, without self-pity, or without it triggering your desires. Sometimes what happens just makes us want more. And it's just accepting, this is what it is, this is how much I got, it's great. A lot of powerful lessons in that, accepting good or bad as just exactly right. So Stoicism is a lot about acceptance. There is an older idea of the basic virtues of life, and that is older even than Aristotle. The Greeks had an idea of basic virtues, and those became built upon by the Stoics as core virtues that are essential to a virtuous life that then are built on by the Stoics. The four key Greek virtues, which become the four Stoic virtues, the four key Stoic virtues, are wisdom, which is in that understanding that I spoke about early on. So understanding how to think and feel and applying your knowledge is where the wisdom is. Knowledge itself isn't wisdom. Learning and applying the knowledge of how to act and feel. Secondly, acting courageously, learning to act correctly no matter what the situation is. So the first virtue was wisdom, the second one is courage. The courage to do the right thing no matter what the situation, to act in the right way no matter what the situation is, no matter how fearful you are. The third of the great classical virtues, is self-control. So that's knowing how to handle yourself in situations, no matter what they are. The most common one for self-control, desire. Appetite. We're drawn to things, we want things, we crave things, we want more of those things. So knowing how to handle ourselves is self-control. And finally, fairness, sometimes called justice. Knowing how to treat others with equanimity, with fairness, to maintain our relationships with other people, whether they're family members, whether they're strangers, even whether they're enemies. And of course, even being generous to them. Part of the point of developing virtue and being a virtuous human being is that it affects who we are. It develops, it changes our personalities, and it develops our personalities, and it helps get us on the right path, which was also something very important in terms of behaving the right way and responding the right way, because Stoicism is a lot about how do I respond to the world, which it's really the very beginning of Stoicism, is all about how do I respond to the world. So that's why developing the virtues changes us in a way that also improves our ability to respond correctly. For example, responding with anger and passion and getting ourselves all upset, is an issue of self-control. But as we develop the virtues and become a more balanced person, we will naturally not respond with emotions that tend to cause more harm to ourselves, such as anger, such as fear, such as desire, which all cause bad reactions, and which are all based on what the Stoics would have regarded as incorrect judgment, incorrect response, not understanding correctly yourself and your relationship to the environment. So that's why they say it takes study and work to develop virtue. If we are ethical, and if we practice the virtues, we become more ethical, then ethical behavior is likely to lead us to better emotional responses. So, for example, rather than desire something, we could wish for it, which is more ethical. It understands it's not mine, it's not automatically mine, I shouldn't automatically get that, and I may not get that. So if we try and transform desire into wish, we can't pretend desire doesn't exist, but we can transform it into wish. It's like transforming fear into caution. I can be cautious, but I won't always pull away. I can be joyful towards other people rather than wanting something back from them. So what is important is that we are all capable of virtue, that it can be developed by anyone because it is something that is a studied and learned behavior. You know, the Stoics and the Greeks were quite big on the idea of fate or the idea of karma, and that things are a given and in some ways you are who you are. But they were also big on the idea of what we call free will, that you have the willpower to act differently, even if your instinct is to desire or to react with anger, and those things are built into you like your personality. You have rational consciousness. And remember, part of what Greek philosophy and especially Stoicism is all about is thinking correctly. Human beings have the gift of rational thinking, and it is rational thinking that can help us control ourselves and develop our better qualities even when they don't come naturally. So very importantly, virtue can be learnt, virtue can be developed. We're not born that way. Obviously, it requires a certain amount of thought and self-awareness and understanding. And the Stoics say we will spend our whole lives working towards them. There's no point at which we are now completely virtuous. So they also acknowledge implicitly the weakness, the tendency that we have to fall off the wagon. And those of you who've tried to overcome any bad behaviors know that you can practice the good behavior for years and years and years and years, and you can fall off the wagon like that. Because maybe that's your karma, that bad behavior. But that doesn't doom you to just play it out. You have free will and consciousness. And so you can choose a better behavior. So choosing better behaviors changes the quality of our lives. And although we don't change ourselves fundamentally, it develops the personality, which is our persona that we put into the world, in a way that enhances our happiness and enhances our relationships with other human beings. Because not only is virtue about being a better person for yourself, but it's having better relationships with other people. And that is something that is perhaps quite important to the basic idea of what virtue is. In the modern world, we often find that we define virtue in relation to other people only. So as long as I do things for other people, I'm fine. And that is a very common modern philosophical idea that I think is a way of getting ourselves off the hook for all sorts of bad behavior towards ourselves and even potentially bad behavior out there in the world. The Stoic idea grounds virtue and ethical behavior in ourselves, in who we fundamentally are, in what we fundamentally are, and that is what affects our relationship with others. And that is very key, and I think that's what makes Stoic virtues worthwhile and attainable. It's not someone telling you, behave well, do good to others, and telling you, or just having to do things that are all outside of yourself all the time. But if it's about developing yourself and understanding things about your nature, that's going to lead to that good behavior anyway. How does that translate into practice? Well, we can use any occasion as an opportunity to develop more ethical behavior and to develop more virtual behavior and to try and be a better human being. You know, when we're in pain, to try and break out of it at least momentarily and realize I'm gaining endurance. I hate this. I wish it wasn't happening, but I'm enduring, and at least there's that. I can recognize that in myself. So discovering a different way to look at things and being more restrained and asking, when reacting to someone, and ask yourself, what's beautiful about that person? Or when you're insulted or hurt, holding back your reaction and learning to use that as an ability to develop tolerance or patience. It's way easier said than done, and the Stoics told us that. It takes a lifetime of practice to develop virtue. But virtue is about yourself. So instead of seeing it as, I won't treat other people that way, it's seeing, how do I respond to how people treat me? As you've heard, it's actually a sliding scale. The classical Stoic idea of virtue is about ourselves and about other people. But I think what I'm trying to say here today is that we need to bring virtue back to self-development and becoming a virtuous being, rather than just concentrating on virtuous behavior. I want to close with Marcus Aurelius' own words. He was the great Stoic philosopher whose diary was published as the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius after his death, and which still is so highly influential to this very day. So here's what Marcus Aurelius says on this topic, which he writes extensively about. He says, "Nothing is so conducive to greatness of mind as the ability to subject each element of our experience to methodical and truthful examination. Always, at the same time, using this scrutiny to reflect on the nature of the universe, as a way to reflect on the nature of the universe. The contribution that every action or event makes to the nature of the universe, the value that each event has for the whole, and the value it has for mankind." It's such a powerful thing that we often don't think of. As you behave as a virtuous human being, you contribute to the virtuous nature of humanity as a whole. We so often feel powerless in the face of, the terrible things that human beings do. We see our fellow human beings and ourselves contributing to the destruction of the planet. We know that we contribute to it ourselves. We can stand outside and say, don't do this, don't burn your that, don't use your plastic. There's so many things that we do ourselves all the time, and we know we tend to be very selective in how we examine our own virtue. So as someone recently said, we tend to concentrate more on not throwing away the plastic in the wrong place, but that doesn't stop us buying the plastic in the first place, if plastic is your thing, or whatever it may be. So it's realizing that we always are selective in how we understand ourselves. But if we understand that in the same way that we all contribute to the harm that is being done to the planet by our behavior as modern human beings, I guess, we can all contribute to the virtue of human behavior by being a virtuous individual. That is quite a powerful thought. One more thing of Marcus's that I want to share with you. He says, and in the light of what I was just saying, every hour of the day, give vigorous attention as a human being to the performance of the task in hand, with precise analysis, with unaffected dignity, with human sympathy, with dispassionate justice, and to vacating your mind from all its other thoughts. And you will achieve this vacation if you perform each action as if it were the last of your life, freed from the lack of aim, from passion-led deviation, from the ordinance of reason, from pretense, from self-love, from dissatisfaction with fate. You see how few things a human being needs to master for the settled flow of a good life. I've paraphrased very slightly just to take away a bit of the archaic Roman, he's talking to Romans, ideas, but that's basically as good as it gets. Vacation, the word he uses. The word we use to mean holiday. A vacation, a clearing your mind of all the nonsense. He's saying, all you need to do, concentrate on the task at hand. Ask yourself the questions about virtue and am I behaving virtuously to myself and others? And if that's all you concentrate on any situation, you will achieve what you're trying to achieve in that situation. You will feel as contented and happy as possible in that situation, and you will vacate your mind from all the other nonsense that makes us so unhappy. Definitely something worth working towards. Well, as ever, those Stoics being a font of very important information. And as I said at the beginning, for me, what is so important is that Stoic philosophy reminds us that virtuous behavior is not just about doing the right thing out there in the world. It begins with yourself.